Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing well. Today's video is going to be a little different than the last couple that I've posted. It's going to be unscripted, and I'm basically just going to talk to you about what I have planned for the next couple weeks, as well as show you some books that I recently picked up because I've been buying books like a madman. So currently, I actually have right in front of me the book that I'm reading for the next review. And I don't want to give too much away, but I will say this. The author of this book is known for being the worst film director of all time. That's basically the only hint I'm going to give you. So other than that, I have a whole stack of books right here that I recently picked up because, again, I'm a maniac. This first one I got is actually a book that I do plan on reviewing relatively soon. I just need to get around to reading it. And it's going to be Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. I saw the movie to this book, also directed by Dalton Trumbo, about, I think, 3-4 years ago. And I thought it was very good. It was very haunting. I remember it staying with me for days after watching it. So I've always wanted to read the book, and I actually picked this up from my father-in-law. So thanks again, Dave. I'll be sure to get this back to you sometime. This is a book that I do plan on reviewing in the near future, so do feel free to let me know or leave a comment down below if you want that reviewed sooner rather than later, and I could get that pushed up. That also goes with any of these books. So the next book I have is going to be the Centipede Press Library of Weird Fiction, and this is going to be an anthology of Robert Aickman's weird fiction. I'll try to get that in focus for you. For those of you who do not know anything about Centipede Press is a publishing company that publishes very high quality volumes of mostly horror, weird fiction, science fiction, fantasy, but they print them in limited quantities, usually around 250 to 300 copies. Unfortunately, once they're out, they're out. They do not make any more copies. That's why it's always a joy to get a book from Centipede Press, because there's always a limited amount out there. And I will read the back of this because there's an excerpt from one of his stories. It reads, "And in my dawn-red room, there is once again blood upon my person. But this time I know, it is at his embrace that my being springs forth, in joy and welcome. His embrace that is at once the softest and the sharpest in the world. How strange that I could ever have failed to recall such bliss." And this is an excerpt from Pages from a Young Girl's Journal. Very excited to begin reading this book. I've heard nothing but great things about Robert Aickman, so I am excited to get into his stuff. I picked up the collection of Robert Aickman stories with actually another anthology, and this is An Ecstasy of Fear by w.h.pugmire. And this is a collection of short stories by the author w.h. Pugmire. I have known of Pugmire for a couple years now. Unfortunately, I have not read a lot of his stuff. The stuff I have read is poetry from that anthology, Dreams of Fear, that I recommended last week. I also read one of his short stories pertaining to the Cthulhu mythos that's in one of my volumes around here somewhere. But unfortunately, I have not read a lot of his stuff, and he did pass away last year, which again is quite unfortunate because the man was very skilled. And I did miss the first volume that Centipede Press put out of his work, so I was happy to get the second volume. Other than that, I also have a huge pile over here of Robert E. Howard's stuff. So before I do go on, I do want to give you a little bit of background information on these next couple books that I'm going to show you. I have rediscovered Robert E. Howard. It's a little tricky to explain, but I'll try to do my best. I first heard of Howard actually about the same time I learned about Clark Ashton Smith. And that was about a year after Lovecraft. And at the time, I don't know what it was, I just was not interested in other writers. I read one story of Smith's, and it was alright. I think it was a werewolf story, and I just kind of brushed it off and I didn't care. And I tried to read a story of Robert E. Howard's. I don't know whether I got interrupted or it just couldn't hold my attention, but no matter what the reason, I never finished the story. And unfortunately, I never really thought of it after that. However, about a year ago, I saw this online biography about him, and that kind of rekindled my interest in Howard. So I decided to look up one of his stories, and the first story I read was Red Shadows, and that was a Solomon Kane story. And finally, when I was done reading it, I knew I wanted to read more. I thought his writing style was very interesting, and that's going to be what a lot of these next books are. These are all going to be published by Del Rey, and I just got to say they've done an amazing job with this series of books. They've essentially published all of Robert E. Howard's work. And they either do it by category, genre, or by individual character, such as Elboric, Cole, Conan, Solomon Kane, so on and so forth. So this first one actually is going to be by genre. And this is going to be the horror stories of Robert E. Howard. There you go. Sorry about the light. But this is actually the one I've been reading most of because this came before all the others. And I would highly recommend this book for anybody who's wanting to get into Howard, but not necessarily wanting to follow one particular character or is intimidated by a character that has this huge, expansive world surrounding him. Within this book, you have 51 stories and poems that are dedicated to horror. It's a very well done and well put together book. It alternates between poetry and stories. So you'll have a story, then you'll have one or two poems, and then you'll have a story again. So by doing that, it's a good way to break up the monotony of story after story after story. The second book I'm going to talk about is Cole. Now, unfortunately, I have not been able to read a whole lot of these, but this is Cole, Exile from Atlantis. Hopefully you can see that fairly well. And I'm really excited to start reading this due to the fact that I've heard nothing but good things about Cole. In fact, a lot of people I've talked to have said that Cole is actually their favorite and they prefer him over Conan. The third book is going to be Elboric and Other Desert Adventures. Again, I do apologize for the light. So honestly, when I first saw this book, I wasn't going to pick it up. I have no idea who Elboric is, and I've never heard of him before. There's also two other characters in here called Kirby O'Donnell and Steve Clarney, and I've never heard of either of them before. So I wasn't going to pick this book up, but I decided to because, one, it's fairly substantial. It's actually thicker than the horror stories. So obviously, Robert E. Howard devoted a lot of time to this character. And the second reason why I picked it up is when I continued to do my research on him, it kind of came off as like an Indiana Jones desert adventure kind of experience, and I was very excited for that. So that's why I finally decided to pick that up. And the next three books I'm going to talk about are all going to be the Conan series. So Del Rey has devoted 3 books to all of the Conan stories that Robert E. Howard wrote. The first one is going to be containing all of the short stories that he wrote pertaining to Conan, and this first one is going to be The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. The second volume is going to only have 3 stories, and the final volume is going to have 5 stories. And that's because these final 2 volumes are actually going to be containing the novellas and novels that Howard wrote about Conan. So this one is going to be The Bloody Crown of Conan. It's only going to have 3 stories. It's going to have The People of the Black Circle, The Hour of the Dragon, and A Witch Shall Be Born. The last one is going to have 5 stories, and it's going to be The Conquering Sword of Conan. Try to get that in so you can see all of it. And the 5 stories this is going to have: The Servants of Bit Yakin, Beyond the Black River, The Black Stranger, The Man-Eaters of Zembolia, and finally Red Nails. So within these 3 volumes, you have the complete Conan stories that Robert E. Howard wrote. Finally, last but certainly not least, is going to be The Savage Tales of Solomon Kane. And I'll try to get that in so you can see all of it. This is probably my favorite book, mostly due to the illustrations on the inside. All of these books are heavily illustrated. In this book, The Horror Stories of Robert E. Howard, each story starts with a small illustration, and some of them even have full plates. So that's pretty impressive. But all of these books are illustrated all the way throughout. But this one I particularly like because I enjoy the illustration style, because it goes along with the savage theme that goes along with his stories. That's it. That's all I've got right now. For any of these books, if you want me to do an in-depth review over one of them or all of them, please be sure to leave a comment down below so that way I can make sure to move it up in the list. But other than that, make sure to be looking out for the next review that I have coming up in the next week, and you guys be sure to have a good one, all right? Till next time.